Hey everyone, Tim Burris here, and today I want to talk about ditching your debugger. We all know the debugger in Visual Studio is amazing. Set a breakpoint, check out every single thing that's going on, check out link queries, what's in all the variables, step through code, step over code, all kinds of amazing tools inside of the Visual Studio debugger. So why should you get rid of it? Of course, I'm not saying never ever use your debugger again, but I will ask you, all the problems that you're solving with your debugger, how are you solving those same problems when they crop up in a production deployment that's on a server, that's on a client machine? Are you relying on feedback from your users, those extremely reliable users that provide step-by-step instructions of everything they've done and full details of the error message they saw last week when they forgot to email you about it? Or maybe you're just letting the .NET error screen give you the full stack trace and just waiting on your users to email over a screenshot of the error. Of course, we know we should not be presenting the end user with an error message that has the full stack trace, reveals everything about our code, and of course gives them a bunch of information they have no idea what it is. And it's kind of funny. It makes me think back to a subject matter expert that I used to work with many years ago. His name was George. He told me that this screen here is the scariest thing that he's ever seen in his life. When he was using the application and an error would come up, you'd get this default .NET Framework error message, and he said it would give him anxiety, that just seeing this made him feel like the entire system has crashed and that he should just go home. Hopefully you aren't presenting your users with this big scary screen, and hopefully you aren't relying on them to provide you all the details about what happened when they got their error message. My recommendation for solving those production issues is having a good logging framework. Of course, there are a lot of logging frameworks out there. They all generally follow the same kind of pattern. You have a logger and you call things like log debug or log warn or error or what have you, so that you can log specific information to whatever target you want, whether it's a file or a database, some other service. So maybe your answer to that is, I do have a logging framework, but I can still solve the problem a lot faster using the Visual Studio debugger than relying on my log files. Well, that might be the case, or maybe you need to log more information or log better information, or maybe you're logging the exact right amount of information and you still find it faster to use your debugger to track down the issue than using your logs. To that I challenge, how do you know? How do you know that you are logging everything you need to log to solve the problems when they're in production if you're using the debugger to solve them all on your machine? If instead you rely solely or almost completely on your log files to solve your problems in development, then you'll know that when it goes to production that you're going to have more than enough information to track down the issues. You're not going to have to ask your users to try recreating the problem or sending you screenshots. You'll know that you have everything you need because you will have used the logger yourself to track down all the issues that you encountered while you were developing the software. So skip the debugger and use your log files to make sure that you can solve the problem. What I commonly hear is, there's so many logging frameworks, I don't even know which one to choose. I don't know how to compare them. Which features should I be looking for? Which features should I avoid? My answer is, it's not important. It really isn't. Just choose one. Don't roll your own. Don't create your own logging framework. A lot of great frameworks have already been created. Just select one. Which one you select is really not as important as you would think. Whether you choose NLog, Serilog, Log4Net, they really all have the same core set of functionality. And that's that you can log to multiple places. Like here, for example, in NLog, we're targeting to send our logs to both a file and to application insights. Over here, we're choosing to send it to a local file, and we're choosing to log it to a network, and we're choosing to log it to a debugger. And here we're choosing to target both Seek, which is a centralized logging framework, we'll talk about a little bit later, and to a log file. All of the major logging frameworks have multiple targets, and their syntax is almost always the same, at least very similar. You're typically going to have your logger, and you're going to call log error or log warn or warn. And it makes even less of a difference when you're in .NET Core. So in the full .NET framework, you're gonna use a logger that's of your actual type. So for example, in this instance, I'm actually using an NLog logger. So the syntax will be specific to NLog. But as you move to .NET Core, it has even less impact, because you're going to be using a logger that is defined in Microsoft's extension logging. Now you can still use your individual logger like NLog or Serilog or Log4Net, but I encourage you to use the Microsoft extensions logging, and then that way it'll be the same through all of your projects. The syntax will be identical for logging your messages, for logging a warning, and then you can easily just at the program startup in a .NET Core application, just change which logger you're using. Here I'm electing to use NLog, but I could change that to Serilog or Log4Net or anything I want, and it's really not going to matter. So it doesn't matter which one you choose, just choose one, don't build your own. The next thing a lot of people say is, I just don't have time. I'd love to have logging in my application, but I actually have work to do. And my company's not going to pay me to spend days in there adding logging information, adding a logging framework. I just don't have time for that. But my response to that is, it's really not that hard. You have a lot of options for how you want to implement your logging framework. And while I recommend that you use dependency injection, at the very lowest level, you could simply install your NLog package or Serilog. You can install your logging framework. You could set up your configuration, and then you can just start using it. This syntax right here will work in any class inside of my .NET framework application. So I create an instance of a logger, and I log the information I need. All I had to do is install the NuGet package and set up my config. And I know this config file might seem overwhelming, but it's not. Most of this is boilerplate. You actually can get this NLog config file from a NuGet package. It'll be here, and it'll have some starting things for you, and you just configure it, and then off you go. Now, I do encourage you to get a little involved, figure out how you want to log things, where you want to log things, add multiple sources. But if you just need to get started, you can just install it, set the config file, and then start using it. Again, I encourage you to set up dependency injection if you already have dependency injection in your project. For example, this one I'm using Unity. You just register NLog just like this, the same with the other frameworks, and then from there you can just dependency inject your iLogger into whatever classes you want, and you'll have logging capability. The same thing goes for a .NET Core application. You simply install the NLog framework. You put your configuration information in your app settings file. Here I'm choosing to just log to a file here. So I only have one target, a log file, and I'm going to have it keep a maximum of 10 files. And if it gets above a certain limit, I'm going to have it create a new file. Now, this is just NLog, but the other frameworks are going to have similar functionality. The attribute names will be different, but the same functionality will exist. And by installing this NuGet package, putting the config in my JSON, I simply go to my program startup, tell NLog, hey, I just want you to use the app settings NLog section to configure yourself, and then right down here, and then right here, I'll just tell .NET Core that NLog is going to be my logger. So anytime I inject Microsoft's iLogger interface and call log, it's going to use my NLog settings to make sure that log. Now up here you might notice that I'm creating an actual instance of a logger, and this is just because in this .NET in this core application, when it's starting up, dependency injection hasn't been fired up yet. So I want to create a logger and let .NET Core get going, and then if anything happens in firing up .NET Core, I can at least log that message and have it go to my logger. So if I've got problems with mapping my Razor pages or routing or any of that stuff, at least I'll get that logged to my logging target. So it really doesn't have to be that hard. And it doesn't have to take that much time just to get basic logging going. And so you've decided you're going to implement a logging framework. You've played rock, paper, scissors and selected a logging framework. Here are a few tips to get started with your logging adventure. First off, logging to the database. I'm a database guy. I love Microsoft SQL Server. I love working with databases. But what I'll say is typically logs don't belong in the database. It's just hard to use them. Looking at this table, something I did probably 15 years ago, you can tell by the fact that it's Hungarian notation, back when I used to prefix everything with TBL underscore. But if you look at this log file, air quotes, you just can't follow this log file and really figure out what's going on. You have to inspect each row, try to figure it out. I understand that we all use the database, and I'll know to go to the database to find it, and I'm fine if you want to make that one of your targets. But if you want to be efficient in using your log files, this is probably the last resort location that you should be checking to see what your logs have to say. My next tip is, if at all possible, target a file, at least for one of your targets. I'm not suggesting it's the only target, but logging to a file is one of the most reliable ways to write your logs. Of course, if you're doing Blazor WebAssembly or Xamarin Forms or Xamarin, then maybe logging to a file is not going to be overly useful because it's going to be on the client machine. But if you are on a server, or if you have access, if you're running a WPF application and have network access, you could log to the network drive, like you can see here, where we target both a local file and we target logging to a network location, so that you don't have to have access to the user's machine to be able to see the logs that are all being pushed out to a specific location. And in fact, in this logging, you can notice that we have our network location, which would be a server folder, and then we actually separate the logs by the source computer that it's coming from. Since there's about 50 users in this organization, it's kind of nice to have those logs sent by their machine name, and then date it. But definitely try to log to a file. Any other type of logging, whether you're going to a centralized service, application insights, app center, a database, any of those things all run the risk of having a connection issue. But logging to a file is pretty reliable. And taking logging to a file a little bit further, I recommend, if at all possible, you log to this common application data. Now, if you're not familiar with this is when you, on a Windows machine, this is the program data folder. And I have never had an issue with any application having access to write to this folder. It's supposed to be a folder that applications can write their files to without risk of being blocked by read-only or not having access. This is where apps are supposed to store their data. So write your logs here. And you'll get formats much like this, and then you can just inspect your log files. So I for sure recommend logging to a file, and more specifically logging to the program data folder. My third tip is that you use Microsoft Extensions logging if you can. So Microsoft Extensions logging is part of .NET Core. It's absolutely not limited to .NET Core applications. For example, there's great documentation for how you can wire this up in Xamarin Forms or .NET Framework apps, desktop apps. You can absolutely get the Microsoft Extensions logging and their dependency injection all working inside of non.NET Core applications without too much trouble. So here it's being implemented in in a Xamarin Forms application, and then from here you can just inject iLogger in anywhere that you need. But of course, in something like Xamarin Forms, you're going to need alternate places to send your logs. So for example, in this application, I'm sending them to Seek, which I'm going to cover in just a moment, and Microsoft App Center. So regardless of the type of application, whether it's a .NET web application, a Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor server, Razor Pages, WPF, console, Xamarin, it doesn't matter. Use Microsoft logging, and then your syntax will be the same across all of your applications. And last but definitely not least, I recommend targeting Seek. Seek is a centralized logging destination or target that you can use. It's for more than just .NET. It has an API and a database. It's a very simple install, and it gets a URL, and all the major logging frameworks, NLog, Serilog, Log4net, all allow you to target Seek as a location to send your log files to. It is free. It is free for single user. You can use it in production if you're just a single individual as opposed to a multi-individual. So you can do it on your developer machine or in production. And instead of reading files, it is nice to be able to come in here and actually see all the information here. You can search on it, you can drill in. So as you might have guessed, the reds indicate errors, the yellows indicate warnings. So you can expand them out and see all the details about these. You can apply filtering over here. You can say you just want to see the errors. Of course, you can filter by date. You can search. So if we were going to find some specific error, and then on any of these properties, you can add what they call a signal, which would be a saved filter. So I've already saved this Pattern Flows API, so I can just easily filter down to the Pattern Flows API or to the portal application. Using this makes finding the issues in your logs way, way more simple. So for me, on my development machine, I have all of my applications target Seek, and you might think, well, what I'm going to do, all of my applications are sending logs to one place, but I mean, realistically, you're only probably working in one, maybe two applications at a time. Maybe multiple layers, like an API, a mobile app, and a web app, but you're only going to be receiving logs for the applications you're working on, so it's really not going to be too much trouble. And then if it is, you can just add your signals and filter them down. So I know there are probably some other centralized logging options out there. Seek is one that I've been using for quite a while, and so I just stick with it. So get a logging framework, get a pattern for how you're going to do your logging, and stop using your debugger to solve all the problems, and make sure that when you get that bug in production, you know that your log files are going to point you to everything you need to be able to solve the problem. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great day.